Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone. Let's start with a bit of Kirtan. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyanisha Darine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyanisha Darine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Jaya 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 Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Chana Vallabha Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Giridvaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamunadhira Vanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Yamunadhira Vanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava 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 Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Giridvaradhari Jaya Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jaya Yamunadhira Vanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Yamunadhira Vanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Gaura Nitai, 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 Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai, Jaya Gaura Nitai, Jaya Nitai Sachi Sundar, Nitai Sachi Sundar, Nitai Sachi Sundar, Jaya Nitai Sachi Sundar, Nitai Sachi Sundar, Nitai Sachi Sundar, Nitai Sachi Sundar, Jaya Nitai Sachi Sundar, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jai Jai Giri Govardhan, Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jai Prabhupada, Jai Gurudev, 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 Jai Gurudev, 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 Jai Gurudev. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Welcome Amit, Ben, Prakash, Poonam, Rajesh and Varshana Kishori Mataji. Hare Krishna. I think I want to introduce Siddhanta Prabhu. Siddhanta Prabhu first came in contact with Prabhupada's teaching and ISKCON in 1970 when he worked as a film editor in Dallas, Texas. He was initiated as a disciple of Srila Prabhupada in 1974 in Denver, Colorado, and served there as a Sankirtan party leader, Bhakta leader, and university and high school lecturer. In 1978, he moved to Los Angeles, California, and became the co-producer and editor of ISKCON Television, producing such classics as, and I'm sure everyone, you heard about any of these classics. The Acharya series, the Ramayana, Krishna puppet shows, and the notable documentaries Coming Back, Reincarnation in America, Healthy, Wealthy and Wise, and Cooking with Kurma. Surely everybody heard and saw that video, Cooking with Kurma. For the last 31 years, he has been going around the world collecting oral histories from Srila Prabhupada's direct disciples about their time with his divine grace and the lessons they learned while in his association. This project is known as Memories, Anecdotes of a Modern-Day Saint. As seen on 87 videos totaling over 130 hours of Prabhupada nectar, Haribol. All these hours of viewing encompass over 2,700 unique stories. These transcendental anecdotes have also now been transcribed into 5 400-page books, which are now being translated into Russian and Spanish. Hare Krishna. So that is very exciting. Let me hand over to Siddhanta Prabhu and we'll greet him very nicely. Hare Krishna, Siddhanta Prabhu Ki Jai. So the spotlight is on you. Let's make sure the video is also working. The audio. Your audio should.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Excellent.
Oh, good. All right. Sorry for the confusion there, but we're up.
It's on my side, it's a confusion.
Okay.
With the link, Hare Krishna.
And
my mobile was switched off, not to interfere.
I don't want to play the blame shame game. But anyway, thank you for inviting me. It's very generous and kind of you to allow me to spend some time with you and your other devotees online here to share some of Prabhupada's stories and nectar. And it's a great opportunity for me to be enlivened to tell you some of these stories that have great lessons to be learned from them, and inspirational stories that hopefully we can derive some benefit and learn more about Prabhupada and appreciate his qualities that will help us in our spiritual growth. So again, thank you so much. The essence of the importance of the series, just to give you a little background, is that I found it very similar to the New Testament that was written a long time ago by Jesus Christ, and stories essentially by his disciples. So, which then in turn will give us a better understanding of Jesus and his teachings. So I call this the New Testament because we, of course, think of Prabhupada as, in that light, as a pure devotee, obviously. And by understanding about Prabhupada and his teachings and his qualities, we can come to a better understanding and appreciation of him, which will develop our attachment for him, very similar to the Krishna book, where Prabhupada is giving us stories about Krishna. And when we learn about Krishna, about his qualities, etc., we can develop a relationship with him through this knowledge of who he is and what he does and all of his features in full. So similarly, when we learn about Prabhupada, we can also develop a love and attraction and attachment for him from these stories, all of Jesus's disciples. So my goal is to reach out to as many Prabhupada disciples as possible, where they are giving me and us, the world, their experience with Prabhupada, which can inform us about the lessons that they learned by being in his direct association, whether it be on morning walks, darshans, one-on-one, situations in a classroom even, and then pass along these bits of information or knowledge, as well as their experience about Prabhupada's qualities, his humor, his wit, his compassion, all the qualities, 26 qualities of pure devotee that you don't necessarily get quality-wise, what to speak of the personal instructions that Prabhupada gave his disciples, which are over and above the classes that he gave directly to the general devotee audience at the time. From the time he came here in 65 all the way to the time he left us in 77. So that's the goal or the purpose of the oral histories. Very significant, I feel. In the same light, it can be realized in the scriptures that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the fourth canto, chapter 13, text 1, it stated that devotees are never satisfied or satiated in hearing and speaking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead or about his devotees. So this is the case within these oral histories. And that the verdict of all revealed scriptures is that by even a moment's association with a pure devotee, one can attain all success. That's stated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And the purport within that verse, Prabhupada states that Krishna is pleased when his pure devotees are glorified. So these oral histories is a prime lesson, a prime way to glorify Prabhupada by associating with him through these stories that the Prabhupada disciples are giving us. So that's the essence there. So this is, a Zoom call, really a conference. So if it's I like to see it as a dialogue. So if anyone during my giving various stories about Prabhupada would like to ask a question or comment about a particular story, please don't hesitate. We can have time at the end, but I would like to maybe, have the discussion open during the 1.5, 2 hours that we have here. Is that okay, Gauranga Sundar?
Yes, Prabhu, I have a request or suggestion. Maybe you start with your own story. How is that?
Okay, I can do that. So my basically story is that I graduated college in 1969 with a marketing degree, but wasn't satisfied with just doing business. So I was attracted to making movies. And so eventually I got a job in Dallas, Texas as a film editor. And while there, it was at a time, Vietnam War, but it was a searching time for me, as many devotees have in their life, not just in the 60s or 70s, but, Krishna says that one comes to approach Krishna or God if one's in distress, in need of money, inquisitive, or search of knowledge. So my wife and I at the time, we were in search of knowledge. We were studying various philosophical movements. And one day we were at the park Sunday in Dallas, and the devotees were there doing Harinama and passing out Back to Godhead magazines. I read the magazine, went home, read the magazine, and the first article that Prabhupada wrote there in the Back to Godhead magazine answered every question she and I had at the time and more. It was like a rude awakening as to the answer to my searching. And so from that time, my attachment to Prabhupada's books and him, began in 1970. At which time I developed a relationship with the temple there. And there was a time where Prabhupada did finally come to Dallas. And we followed him from the airport to the temple. This was on a Sunday. And Prabhupada gave a lecture. He always does a greeting lecture, but it was a Sunday feast, so it was packed with not only devotees but congregational members of the public. And Prabhupada was talking basically about the benefit of chanting Hare Krishna mantra. That was the essence of his talk. And at the end, they opened it up for Q&A, questions. And the first person that had a question raised his hand and said, somewhat challenging, he was maybe 10 feet in front of Prabhupada, and said to Prabhupada, what do you feel when you chant Hare Krishna? What do you personally feel when you chant Hare Krishna? And Prabhupada, in a heartbeat, without hesitation, sat up on his Vyasasana and said, I feel no fear. That phrase, because it was so instantaneous and so filled with Shakti, that it went into my heart. It wasn't a matter of mental concoction or mental, deliberation at all, where I could realize that if I wanted to be not filled with fear, which was actually the nature of the material world, is to always be in fear. And we want to be in Vaikuntha, which is without fear. So my potential of being drafted into the Vietnam War was fearful, always having fear of not having enough money, pay the rent. Will I be successful in this job? Will I, so many different things that the mind comes up with that create fear within one's psyche. So Prabhupada said that by chanting Hare Krishna mantra, then there will not be fear. You'll be without fear. I feel no fear. So that was my goal. And at the same time, because it was so instantaneous, it was an impression upon my heart that Prabhupada was connected like this with Krishna. There was no doubt about it that he was connected with Supersoul, with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that was my first impression upon physically seeing Prabhupada after I had read that Back to Godhead magazine. Eventually, I did join the temple in Denver. Well, I joined the temple in Dallas, but moved up to Denver, Colorado, and still being a film editor, but joined officially the temple there, I think in 1972, and got initiated in 74. Prabhupada came to Denver in 1975, spent a week there. He came because we were like number 2 in the world as far as distribution of books. That's what attracted Prabhupada to visit any temple, were the Sankirtan scores. So we were anxious to have him come. And we just went all out, and we had the not as big as LA or Radha Damodar Party. I forgot who was number 1, but it was big enough to attract Prabhupada. Actually, when Prabhupada came, one of my godbrothers, Padmanabha, said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, we are number 2 in the world, Srila Prabhupada, and expecting a pat on the back. Prabhupada said, oh, then you should make it number 1. So he was always encouraging for making things greater and better, which, shocked Padmanabha because he was expecting some praise, but Prabhupada was always giving words of advice that were sometimes unexpected. But while there, Prabhupada did go on morning walks around the park there in Denver. And one particular morning, the discussion was about prasadam. And actually the same devotee, Padmanabha, was doing sales. He was selling jewelry. So he was driving various distances to, make Lakshmi to support the temple. And because the morning prasadam was so laden with ghee, it was like upma and halava and puris and chapatis, and he started driving and he would like nod out. He would kind of, he would get tired and your belly's full and you're not able to run or work it off. So he had a tendency to fall asleep at the wheel. So he asked Prabhupada, is there something else that I can eat besides this prasadam that's offered to the deities? And Prabhupada said, yes. You don't have to eat heavy prasadam. You can eat fruit. Just offer whatever you want to take, and just make sure it's, maybe in the kitchen, you put it right next to the main offering. You don't have to eat everything Krishna eats if it's too heavy. And Prabhupada was always practical. So on that same walk, discussing about prasadam, Prabhupada came and to discuss the potency of prasadam. And he said that prasadam was so spiritual that if you offer even an ant or any one of the species other than the human species, prasadam, and they eat the prasadam of the 8,400,000 species, of all the animal species, if they eat prasadam, in their next life, they jump over all the other species to take birth in the human form of life. So very, very significant lesson that about the importance of prasadam, even to the point where Prabhupada was on a plane one time. And the general custom was that after takeoff, and they were in the air, Prabhupada would ask Shrutikirti, or his servant at the time, to, all right, let's have lunch, let's have prasad. And so this one particular time, he honored the prasadam, and when he was done with the prasadam, he took out a toothpick, and he was about to, use the toothpick on his teeth. And his servant was sitting in the row right behind him, who noticed Prabhupada was finished with his prasadam and was about to evidently clean his teeth with his toothpick. And so he said, oh, I must do this, So he got his shaving kit to get up and go to the bathroom to brush his teeth. Prabhupada saw that he was getting up. Prabhupada said, oh, where are you going? Well, I'm going to brush my teeth, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, sit down. Prabhupada said to him that I am using the toothpick to get every last morsel of prasadam, that it doesn't go to waste. So this is the significance and the importance of prasadam, that he said, you clean your teeth before you eat, not after. So you want to make sure you honor every little morsel, because it's Krishna. Prabhupada, that's how Krishna conscious Prabhupada is, or was and is. So that's just a little side note there about the potency of prasadam. That was one story of while in Denver. So, any other questions you want to ask Gauranga Sundar Prabhu?
Well, thank you very much for the beautiful pastime and story. Rather, very unexpectedly, and I haven't heard anything like that. Yes. Okay. That is, of course, very nice. Not that we're brushing. Actually, we shouldn't brush our teeth after eating because it destroys our animal also. That is a different story. But to get the prasadam down, that is beautiful. Right, yes, so, carry on.
Okay, so I have taken some notes, of the 2,700 stories. I mean, we don't have enough time to, that might take us 65 2-hour sessions to tell all the stories that have been recorded. But just as a shameless promotion, that if any of the devotees want to hear these stories or read them, you can go to prabhupadamemories.com, and there you can find, you can, order books, or you can get I have now flash drives, little, flash drives you plug into your laptop or your smart TV, and you can see all the 87 videos on your flash drive. It comes out to be about $3 a video, so very, very inexpensive. That's the promotion for the day, prabhupadamemories.com. But out of some of those 2,700 stories, I've written a few down that might be inspirational or educational. Prabhupada was, not only the heavy guru that was giving class during the Bhagavatam and the Gita classes, which he is, and he is, he fills that role as a guru, as heavy, and giving us the teachings of the Gita and the Bhagavatam. But he's also a person. He has qualities of, of someone who's not so serious all the time. He had a sense of humor, a very quick wit. And so by developing or by learning about these qualities, this will actually give us a notion how we can actually relate to Prabhupada as a human being. He was a pure devotee. He was a saint, but he, was not God. So we know that. But by hearing about these particular qualities, in this case, I'm going to tell you a few stories about his wit and his humor, we can get the balance, the counterbalance to his seriousness that he presents, obviously, and rightfully so, as a heavy teacher. Always teaching. He is an Uttama Adhikari, but come down to the Madhyama Adhikari platform to teach us. Guru Das told me a story that one time, early days, Guru Das joined very early. In San Francisco, a Mataji came up to Prabhupada one morning and said, and he was called Swamiji at that time. She said, "Oh, Swamiji, you look so nice today." And Prabhupada immediately said, "Oh, just today?" So he was getting to the point where, hey, don't I look good every day? So this is one short little story. I'm going to tell you some short stories now that you can remember. This is having these stories can help us remember these characteristics and qualities of Prabhupada, as well as the teachings. By remembering a story, we'll be able to remember the lesson that's attached to this particular story. Similarly, as Prabhupada has given us many analogies in his books that help us understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So similarly, through these oral histories given by Prabhupada's disciples, we can learn by remembering these stories that relate to the lesson that's attached to that particular story. So if you don't get the books or get the videos, maybe you can take some notes for yourself that you can tell other people, your friends, if a particular story or anecdote inspires you. So I recommend getting a pen and paper and jot down some notes as we discuss some of these stories. One time Prabhupada was in London and with Tribhuvanath. You all know Tribhuvanath? Raise your hand if you know Tribhuvanath. Okay, thumbs up. So wonderful devotee, great devotee. So one time he was in the car with Prabhupada and they were driving around London and they passed by Buckingham Palace. And there the guards, are standing there very straight and stoic. And they're the ones with the big furry hats, right? You know that better than I do, Gauranga Sundar Prabhu, or anyone from the UK. So they passed by and Tribhuvanath said, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, one of the Queen's guards has joined the movement." And Prabhupada immediately said, "Oh, so what about the Queen?" So he was, again, always aiming higher. Like Padmanabha was saying, "Well, we're number 2, Prabhupada." Prabhupada said, "Well, you make it number 1. So Prabhupada was always encouraging to go further, to go higher. So he wanted the Queen to be a devotee. In the early days, there was an alarm clock that was in the temple room, and it went off, not in Prabhupada's room, but somewhere near Prabhupada's room. An alarm clock, went off very loudly. And Prabhupada said, "What is that noise?" And they said, "Oh, Prabhupada, that's an alarm clock." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, who is in danger?" It was the early days where devotees did not know Prabhupada could be sarcastic, that he could be, have a sense of humor like that. That it was like, they took Prabhupada so serious, One time, the Prabhupada was giving class and with guests and devotees, and Prabhupada was saying, all the women who don't get married, they should be married to a tree. And Baba Tarini was there, and she said, a tree? I was thinking, how does a woman get married to a tree? I don't understand that. And there was an Indian girl right next to her as she was verbalizing her query. And the Indian girl realized that was a joke. She said to Baba Tarini, "That's a joke. Prabhupada has a sense of humor. That Prabhupada wasn't serious about marrying a tree." And Baba Tarini, like the alarm clock, had no idea that Prabhupada could have a sense of humor. So these are some small stories that bring out that other side of Prabhupada that we may not be familiar with. One devotee said, Prabhupada, I must have fallen into Maya. And Prabhupada said, you're always in Maya. Sometimes you fall into Krishna. So we should take that to heart that, if we're in the movement for a few years, we shouldn't be so proud and puffed up that we're thinking that we're a pure devotee now, that maybe I'll have the opportunity to fall into Krishna. But reality is that I'm pretty much in Maya all the time. And sometimes I'm lucky to fall into Krishna. Always want to keep ourselves humble. Hridayananda Goswami told me that one time there was a reporter who met Prabhupada, and I'm not sure what city it was, but the reporter knew something about Hinduism. And he knew that the Hindus and the Indians, that there's a sannyas order within the culture of India. And that he knew that, or he understood that generally, most sannyasis are old. You don't take sannyas till you're old or older. So this reporter asked Prabhupada, well, why are you giving sannyas to these young people? They're 20, late 20, mid 20, late 20s. Well, why are you giving them to young people? Isn't it that you give sannyas to old people? Prabhupada said, what does it mean to be old? The reporter had no answer. Prabhupada said, old means you're about to die. Can you say you're not going to die before me? Or I'm going to die before you? You don't know. And this reporter had no answer. And Prabhupada said, therefore, we are giving them sannyas. Always thinking of the proper answer for the person who asked a particular question, and with perfect answer. As far as sarcasm, Prabhupada was in Dallas, and the devotees there knew that Prabhupada liked to preach, not just to the devotees, but also to members of the public. This one day, when Prabhupada was there, they wanted to have a meeting for Prabhupada of various members of the public. They knew a scientist in the community who really didn't come often to the temple, but they called him and he agreed he would come and meet Prabhupada. And so when he was meeting Prabhupada, there was, a conversation. Prabhupada would always be a gentleman and ask, what do you do? Where are you from? Getting to know the person, it's not immediately, you must surrender. So he's being a gentleman and engaging the person in a conversation. So this one scientist, he said, well, he told Prabhupada, I'm a scientist. And Prabhupada said, oh, what do you do as a scientist? And this man said, well, we do experiments. We experiment on cats. And Prabhupada immediately said, all animals don't get a chance? All animals don't get a chance? So the sarcasm, hit home to this scientist. He realized that, well, yeah, I don't, experiment on my dog or any other kind of animal. So he realized that that sarcasm was meaningful, and he became silent, and he got the message. So with sarcasm, depending on our technique, and we're not Prabhupada, but he could get away with it for sure. So another time, showing Prabhupada's quick wit, there was a Sunday feast here in Los Angeles, and a huge crowd came. Many people came to hear Prabhupada. And it was in the, the late 60s, so hippie days. And there was one particular guest who came dressed in a blue robe, dark blue, purplish robe with stars and moons and suns and different things plastered all over the robe, in a hippie fashion. And after Prabhupada's lecture, they opened it up for questions and answers. And this young man, hippie, long hair, stood up and said, "Can you see Krishna?" Prabhupada said, "No, you're in the way." And he sat down, he accepted it, he took it, and he stayed for the rest of the feast. So depending on the person, Prabhupada could judge their heart and gave them an answer that was meaningful and receptive for that particular person. That was another form of Prabhupada's quick wit and an answer to a somewhat challenging question. Another time, Kishore. Do you know Kishore there in the UK?
Yes.
Okay, so Kishore told me when I was in the UK collecting interviews, a very meaningful story for me, where in the same vein, an Indian lady came she had been coming to the temple quite often, but Kishore was mentioning how she was challenging and thinking that she knows it all because she's in an Indian body, you know, the type maybe. And after Prabhupada gave a lecture, she also stood up and said, "Well, can you see God?" And with a different answer, Prabhupada said, he looked around and said, "Yes, you cannot see God?" She shook her head, no. There was silence. She shook her head, no. Prabhupada said, "Krishna is everywhere. You cannot see God?" She said, "No." Silence. And time passed. Prabhupada said, Krishna is everywhere. Why you cannot see God?" Silence. And then Prabhupada said, "Do you want to see God?" She shook her head. Prabhupada said, "Therefore you cannot see God." Pointed at her. And Kishore said he could see the lightning bolt, the energy come out of Prabhupada's finger to this lady. And she withered back down to the floor in humility and realizing that she was in the presence of a greater personality who could see God.
Haribol.
So another question and a different type of answer, depending on the person who was posing the question. And in the similar vein, that so many people would ask Prabhupada, "Can you see God?" Another time, Rameshwar was in the room, and he told me the story that there were two students who asked Prabhupada the same thing. "Can you see God?" No, actually, it was Prabhu who told me that his students asked Prabhupada, "Can you see God?" And Prabhupada said, If I give you an answer, will you believe me? If I say yes, will you believe me? No. Then what is the use of your question? And then another student said, "Well, can you see God?" And Prabhupada said, "Well, shouldn't you know what the qualifications are of God? So that if someone tells you they have seen God, that you can match your understanding that what they're saying is true, just like gold. To know that someone is selling you gold, don't you need to know the qualities of gold? It has so many characteristics. So not to be cheated, you need to find out what are the qualities of gold. So therefore, if you want to know if I have seen God, will you accept what I say is true?" They said, "Yes." Prabhupada said, "Therefore I have seen God." On a morning walk, Bahulasva also posed that question on the beach here in Santa Monica. Prabhupada said, well, many people say that no one has seen God. Prabhupada said, no fool has seen God. I am no fool like you. I have seen God. Various powerful statements to increase our faith, to know that we are in the presence of a bona fide spiritual master who is connected with Krishna, who can answer all these questions, that we should not be fooled and think otherwise. As far as humor goes, Hansaduta Prabhu told me that in the early days, before he joined the movement, he was not happy with the name that his parents gave him. His parents gave him Hans as his first name, and his last name was Carey, Hans Carey. So he was very motivated to get initiated because he wanted a new spiritual name, so he wouldn't be carrying around this heavy load of Hans Carey. For some reason, it was not appealing to him. So when the time came for his initiation, he said, okay, here's my opportunity. Because my name starts with an H, as we know, generally, you would receive a spiritual name that starts with the same letter as your birth name, right? Shake your head if you agree. Okay. I'm hoping that other people on this call can agree. Anyway, that's the way it was in the early days, and usually still is now. So Hansaduta was thinking, okay, I'm going to get Hari Das or Hari Kesh Das or some Hanuman Das, and he was thinking of all these different names that he would love to have. And finally, he got his beads from Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, your name is Hansaduta. And Hansaduta said, what? He said, what was that? Hansaduta. Just add Duta as a suffix to your name, Hans. So Hansaduta, you mean I still have to have Hans as a name? Just add Duta, Hansaduta? And he was married. So it's Hansaduta Adhikari. Adhikari, but it was still a Carey. So he still had Hans Carey as a name. So he's very disappointed. He was like, oh no, I can't get rid of this name, Hans Carey. Although it was a spiritual name. But he didn't know what the name was. He didn't know, he had never heard of Hansaduta. It wasn't in any of the books. So next day he went to Prabhupada, Srila Swamiji, early days, Swamiji, where can I find the meaning to this name, Hansaduta? Prabhupada said, I don't know. He's playing with Hansaduta. He said, I don't know. So he left, bewildered again. So he was, again, frustrated that he couldn't find some spiritual meaning to this name that he got, which was very similar to Hans Carey, Hansaduta Adhikari. So he went and, he wasn't going to take no for an answer. So he went back in. He said, Prabhupada, Swamiji, where can I find the meaning to this name, Hansaduta? Prabhupada said, in the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's a very, it's a big book. He wasn't being specific. He was playing with Hansaduta. So he okay, now I got to go do some more research. I got to find this. He was scratching his head like Gauranga Sundar Prabhu. So he was still not happy. About a year later, year goes by. And must have been when Prabhupada was perhaps in Montreal. Don't quote me on the exact location. But Prabhupada was having a darshan with his disciples. And Prabhupada was musing about the devotees' names. Krishna Chaitra, that means this and that. And Kishore means this and that. And Krishna Das means this and that. Prabhupada was going around to different devotees and telling them what their name means. And so Hansaduta was thinking, oh, okay, here's my opportunity. He said, Srila Prabhupada, who is Hansaduta? And Prabhupada said, you are. So he was always playing with him. But that's aside his sense of humor. He was, just a very personal side of Prabhupada, very loving. He was very loving and generous with his sense of humor when the time was appropriate. So that was a very good recollection from Hamsaduta. There was another story that also shows how Prabhupada can show a mystical side to himself, where he's in connection with the Supersoul, with Krishna, at all times. And this was evidenced by Vamanajan Prabhu, who joined the movement in New Vrindavan with a friend of his, Bhaskar. They joined the movement together. And do you know this story, Gauranga Sundar? Do you know about Vamanajan?
I thought I'm going to ask you the slippers, right?
Yes.
Hare Krishna. I wanted to hear that, and here you go. Very
Okay.
nice.
All
You.
right. So
Hare Krishna.
hopefully it's not a repeat for some of the others that are on the call. But you're recording this, right?
Yes.
Okay. Vamanajan Prabhu joined. Let me take a sip of water. This is a little bit longer story. Vamanajan joined the movement in New Vrindavan days with his friend who he grew up with, Bhaskar. And there was a time in New Vrindavan when there was a lot of rascals, like hooligans and ruffians that would shoot up their guns in the air and cause havoc within the community. So when Prabhupada came to New Vrindavan, the powers that be realized that Prabhupada should have some bodyguards. And they began with having one devotee as a bodyguard 24 hours a day. But that was, not practical because, who can not go without sleep? So then they said, okay, we're going to divide. We're going to have 3 bodyguards, and each bodyguard will then take an 8-hour shift. So this continued on for 1 or 2 years. They were Prabhupada's bodyguards. And when Prabhupada came to Los Angeles, Bhaskar had the morning shift, 8-hour shift. And Vamanajan had the shift after him. Bhaskar came to Vamanajan and said, I have an idea. I found out that Srila Prabhupada has this particular pair of slippers. And I noted the size of the slippers. And I decided I'm going to go out and buy a pair of slippers just like Prabhupada has, the same size. And Vamanajan said, why would you do that? You're bigger than he is. Why would you couldn't fit in those slippers. And Bhaskar said, well, I tell you what I'm going to do. Srila Prabhupada, you could set your watch to Prabhupada. Prabhupada was so regulated in his habits, chanting at a certain time, going on the morning walk at a certain time, coming back and pay the obeisances, offering, greeting the deities, giving class, boom, boom, boom. This was like, the schedule. So he noted that Prabhupada would go out on the morning walk in LA, come back, and then after the morning walk, he would come to the temple room doors. He would take off his slippers, go into the temple room, greet the deities, give class. After class, of course, pay his obeisances to the deities, come back to the door where he had put his slippers, put the slippers on. And here in LA, there's a staircase that leads up to his rooms. So he would put his slippers on, walk up the stairs, take his slippers off outside his door, and then walk into his room, because we don't wear our shoes or slippers in the house. cleanliness. That's our culture. So Bhaskar noted that, and he had a plan that he devised. So he's going to buy these pair of slippers just like Prabhupada, same brand, same size. And what he did, what he was going to do and did, was when Prabhupada came in one morning, he took his slippers off at the door of the temple room, walked in. And when Prabhupada walked into the temple room to offer his to pay his greetings to the deities and give class, at that time, Bhaskar would exchange the new pair of slippers that he had just purchased and took Prabhupada's slippers. Then the plan was that when Prabhupada came out, Prabhupada would put on the new pair of slippers that Bhaskar had purchased, walk up the stairs, take those new slippers off, and then go into his room, at which time Bhaskar would then take the original slippers and replace them with that pair of slippers he bought, so that he would have a pair of slippers that Prabhupada would have worn, at least just one time, but they would have the footprint of the pure devotee. And that would be what nectar, what spiritual paraphernalia that could be. So he did that. The next day, Vamanajan said, well, where should I buy my slippers? That's a brilliant idea. I want to do that too. And Bhaskar said, no, you shouldn't do it. And Vamanajan said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I want to get you got your pair. You don't want me to have a pair? And Bhaskar said, no, you shouldn't do it. I'll tell you what happened. He said he was outside Prabhupada's room. There's a little landing there. And he was chanting his japa, waiting. And he saw that Prabhupada walked in the room without taking his pair of slippers off. And he started getting nervous. He was chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. He didn't know what to do because he couldn't exchange the original slippers back with the one that he purchased. Prabhupada put them on and walked right into the room and closed the door. So he's getting nervous. Now a sannyasi comes out of Prabhupada's quarters and said, are you Bhaskar? He nervously said, yes. He said, well, Srila Prabhupada has a message for you. And now he really started to get the sweat started to come from his forehead. And the sannyasi said, Prabhupada has a message for you. First of all, thank you very much for the new slippers. Secondly, you may keep the old slippers. But more importantly, it is not nice to play tricks on the spiritual master. So that is a learning lesson. First of all, Prabhupada was very kind and generous. First, he was appreciative. He showed signs of appreciation. That's a lesson. And we should always appreciate gifts. When you get a gift, we know that's a sign of love. So Prabhupada was saying, thank you. He appreciated the gift. He saw it as a gift. And then he was very generous by saying, and you may keep the old slippers. So what kind of compassion and generosity does that show? But then thirdly, the most important lesson that we learn is that we shouldn't play tricks on the spiritual master, that we think that we have that relationship as a friend and a friend to have. But no, he is a guru and we are the disciple, that we should not assume otherwise and thus think that we can play tricks on the spiritual master. So did I tell that okay, Gauranga Sundar Prabhu?
Beautiful. Hare Krishna. One of my favorite stories is with Mulapur Kriti, who was up in the room when Prabhupada came. You know which one I mean?
Well, she told many stories, but
Yes,
there was
she
one
did.
where in Hawaii, where she was distributing books. And it was either in Hawaii or LA. I'm not sure where this particular story was. She did tell me a couple of stories. One, that significant one, that shows Prabhupada, again, his compassion. Prabhupada had always showed so many different qualities in different situations. And in this case, Mula Prakriti was in the room with Prabhupada, darshan with some other devotees. And Prabhupada was talking to another devotee and telling a story. And Mula Prakriti tells me that she had a tendency to interrupt. This was her nature. And, when she was on Sankirtan, great devotee, such a nice person. And she was also a great book distributor. And that she told me that her tendency when she was talking to somebody and they were engaging in a conversation back and forth, she had a tendency to interrupt that person, thinking that she knew what that person was going to say. So that tendency occurred when she was in the room with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was talking about some topic, and she thought she knew where Prabhupada was going with the conversation. And she interrupted and said what she believed Prabhupada was going to say. And when she first did that, Prabhupada was startled that someone would interrupt him in a conversation. But because what she said was accurate, he's kind of let it go by without any words of chastisement. And so he said, kind of startled. And at that time, there was a sannyasi passing by the room when the door was open, and he heard and saw that Mula Prakriti was interrupting Prabhupada. And he was startled, and he was trying to give her a hand signal, don't do that. But sure enough, Prabhupada again is engaging in conversation and going in a different direction, a different story. And this time she interrupts him again. But her interruption is not the right answer. It was the wrong name or the wrong topic or the wrong answer to the direction that he was going in. And this time Prabhupada was very startled because it was the wrong answer to his preaching, where he was going with his dialogue. And now that sannyasi was there again. He was like standing guard, and he was going, no, to Mula Prakriti, don't stop, And she realized her faux pas. And because Prabhupada continued the conversation, but correcting her answer to where he was going with a different answer that where he wanted to take the conversation. And then because he answered in a way that she did not respond properly to, she felt like, this tall. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada. And she started backing out on her hands and knees, crawling backwards, trying to find the exit, without eyes in the back of her head to see exactly where the door was. But as she was halfway back to the exit, Prabhupada looked at her with his beads in his hands. He said, oh, just see how enthusiastic she is. So Prabhupada saw it was out of love that she was, trying to help and carry along the conversation, but he wouldn't find fault with her, only found the good, and, uplifted her. He could see that she was embarrassed, but his response was to alleviate that embarrassment by giving her words of encouragement. Just see how enthusiastic she is. That's Prabhupada. Was that the story that you had in mind?
No, the story I had in mind was in the bathroom, where she cleaned the bathroom and Prabhupada came and she couldn't get out. And he came with a gentleman who always said, look, what a beautiful sunset, and so on.
Oh, yeah. That one we'll save for another day, but they're all great. An interesting one, do you know about when Prabhupada had written the Krishna book and how he asked Shamashundar to ask George Harrison for the money to print the Krishna book? Do you know that one? Okay, another sip of water, excuse me. And if anybody else is on line here, here's Ben, here's Vishanti, Lohia, Amit, Rashmi. So if anybody else wants to step in and with a comment, don't hesitate. This particular story is about the Beatles, George Harrison. And at the time, Shama Sundar and the other devotees who came to the UK in the early days, they actually had a mission to make the Beatles Krishna conscious. That was one of their goals in coming to the UK. And Prabhupada's direction to them, first of all, was to always be enthusiastic. Mukunda Goswami tells me, just as a prelude to the George Harrison story, they went to Prabhupada in Montreal before they flew to London. And they wanted to, and if Prabhupada had any words of advice, any suggestions for them. And Prabhupada told them a story. Instead of just giving them a direct instruction, Prabhupada told them a story about a famous movie that he had seen with, I believe it's Charlie Chaplin. Prabhupada liked the humor of Charlie Chaplin. So it was a movie wherein Charlie Chaplin is dancing, ballroom dancing. And Charlie Chaplin played this character, and he left the dance hall to rest, and he sat down, and some kids, as a trick to this man, to Charlie Chaplin, tore his pants. And his bare side was showing. And Charlie Chaplin, after this happened, he hadn't realized what had happened to his pants, his coattails or his pants. And he started dancing, went back on the dance floor, and with enthusiasm, he was just dancing back and forth. And everyone else on the ballroom floor was seeing this man, Charlie Chaplin, the character Charlie Chaplin played, as dancing, and he was getting all the attention. And Charlie Chaplin was thinking that he got the attention because he was dancing so nicely. But in fact, they were looking at his bare bottom because his pants had been ripped. And Mukunda Goswami told me that after Prabhupada told him that story, that he said, well, I wonder why Prabhupada told us that story, after we asked him if there were any instructions about what we should do when we get to the UK, to London. And then he realized that it's the lesson of enthusiasm, that if they approach their activities with enthusiasm, they will garnish attention, and they will get the attention of the Beatles and everyone else. So that was the lesson there, that if you go on Sankirtan or do anything in life, if you do it with enthusiasm, you will be successful. So at that time, Prabhupada, when they did meet the Beatles, Prabhupada told them that just give them everything. Don't ask for money. Just give them prasadam, give them books, just give. So they would constantly bring cupcakes and prasadam and kachoris and different types of prasadam to Apple Studios where the Beatles were playing. And it got their attention, especially with George. They all loved the prasadam. They couldn't wait for more to come. And there was a time then that at this time, a year or so later, that Prabhupada had finished writing the Krishna book. And the Krishna book hadn't been printed yet. And it was going to cost $19,000 to print the Krishna book. And Prabhupada didn't have it. BBT didn't have the money. And at that time, $19,000 was, for the devotees, was not pocket change. It was, a significant amount. So Prabhupada asked Shama Sundar to come into his room. And he came in, and Prabhupada said, well, we have this Krishna book, but we don't have the money to print it. It's ready for print. I'm very upset that it's ready to print, but it's not printed yet. What can we do? Shama Sundar had no answer. Prabhupada said, well, I want you to ask George for a donation to help print this book. And Shama Sundar, who was really the closest of all of them with George, said, oh no, Srila Prabhupada, I don't think that's a good idea. You've always told us just to give, and that we shouldn't be beggars. We shouldn't ask like some other group might already ask him for money. We shouldn't do it. I don't think it's a good idea. Prabhupada said, no, Krishna will help you. You'll see. So Shamashundar left the room and he realized that he had an order from the guru. How could he not do what Prabhupada's asking? He's the spiritual master. He has more affinity with Prabhupada, of course, than he did George Harrison, although he wanted to maintain that friend relationship with George. So he took it to heart, but he was thinking for a long time, how is he going to broach the subject with George without causing disruption in George's liking him and Krishna consciousness. So there was one day where George invited Shamashundar along with David Wynne, who was the sculptor laureate of England at the time. David Wynne also was the one who designed the coinage for the English monetary system. He also created busts of Queen Elizabeth and also the busts of the Beatles, actually, very expert sculptor. So George invited Shamashundar with David Wynne as they went to a location to buy marble. It's like a 5,000-pound slab of marble that George was going to donate to the temple for their altar. So he's going along. Shamashundar went along graciously, of course. He'd love to go along with that. And all the time during the days thinking, okay, how am I going to broach this subject with George? He's already given money to buy this huge slab marble for the altar. It's not cheap. So they get the slab, they buy it, they go back to David Wynne's house or George's house. I'm not sure which one. Don't quote me on which house. But they go back and they have dinner. And all the time during dinner, Shamasundar's thinking, okay, I got to, Prabhupada asked me to do this. I got to ask George for the money for a donation, but I don't know how to do it. So after dinner, they finish dinner. Shamashundar finds a time where he can be alone with George. And he said, George, Shamashundar told me he made Prabhupada the bad guy. So he said, George, Srila Prabhupada asked me to ask you to help, if we could help donate this money for the Krishna book. And George didn't know what the Krishna book was. So Shamashundar explained to George what the Krishna book was, what it entailed. And he said, and it cost $19,000. And by this time, Shamashundar said when he said $19,000, he saw George's eyes. I don't know if he could see him, but George's eyes rolled in his head. He said, oh no. He gave the look of, oh, here we go. Here's just another group wanting money. At that moment, when George was giving the eye roll, like, oh my God, no, just another group. It was storming out. And there was at that moment when George was becoming dissatisfied with being, we call it hit up here in America, being asked, begging for money for a donation. Just at that same moment, there was a bolt of lightning. There was thunder, and simultaneously with the thunder was a bolt of lightning that hit the house. You know, when you hear thunder and then you count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, and then I'm sorry, it's backwards. When you see the lightning and then you hear the thunder, that's how far away it is. But at this moment, that Shamashundar saw the bolt of lightning and heard the thunder at the same time. So it hit the house and it knocked out the electricity of the whole house. All the power went out, and they were standing there in pitch darkness, pitch black, standing face to face with one another. And they were silent. They were like shocked. I don't know, 5-10 minutes, they were in silence. Finally, the power came back on. The first thing George said to Shamashundar said, well, how much did you say it was then? George was very spiritual. He saw that as a direct sign from Krishna. Like, don't think this is some other group. This is something you need to donate to. And he did donate graciously. And as you know, if you read the Krishna book, at least in the big one, the big silver books, George writes a very nice comment about Krishna, and then he signs it George Harrison. So that's just an example how Prabhupada was in touch with Krishna. Prabhupada knew there would be a way for Krishna to get George to make this donation, and that there should be no fear. Remember that when you chant Hare Krishna, how do you feel? There feel no fear. So he was instructing Shamashundar not to have fear, that Krishna will help. And he did. So that's how the Krishna book was printed.
Haribo, beautiful story. I would like to ask, there are a number of devotees here. Please ask some questions, not just me, it's Siddhanta Prabhu, Ben, Varshana, Vasanti, Rashmi. That is our chance now. Ask some questions, anything, please. Just unmute your microphone and just speak.
That's okay. I can continue with just telling stories. Anyone raising their hand?
Yes, you can put the hand raising feature. Don't be shy. Or if you want to hear a particular story, it's not that, oh, I heard this story before. We can hear these anecdotes 1,000 times over and over again.
I'll tell you another story about, one from the UK, because you're in the UK. I don't know if everybody else on this call is from the UK. But Ranchor, do you know Ranchor, Prabhu?
Yes, of course.
So you might have heard this story before, but Ranchor was with Darshan, or a class that Prabhupada was giving, and Prabhupada asked Ranchor to stand up and to preach some philosophy. Prabhupada would do that frequently, that he wanted to see if his disciples knew the philosophy well. So he would give them a chance to preach. And so Ranchor got up, and Ranchor said, well, okay, he thought, okay, what am I going to say? And then he said, well, to the audience, congregation, he said, when you chant Hare Krishna, first he said, this material world is a concomitant place of happiness and distress. And Prabhupada immediately cut in, said, no, only distress. So Ranchor said, oh, okay, got that lesson. Then Ranchor said, well, when you chant Hare Krishna, you can approach Krishna. Again, Prabhupada cut it up immediately. No, when you chant Hare Krishna, Krishna is with you. You don't approach Krishna, is there in his holy name. So very instructive. So what I got from that was, I better pay attention to when I chant. I should hear these names because Krishna is there. Not that I'm approaching Krishna. No, he is there. Very significant to help us advance. How are we going to advance? By getting the anartas off our hearts. We need to clean our heart. And how do we clean the heart? We hear the names, the holy names, non-different from Krishna. So when we chant, we have to pay attention. That's the purport that Prabhupada is giving us. Not that you approach Krishna. No, Krishna is with you. So we have to pay attention. Another way that we can understand Prabhupada's potency and how he's, again, in tune with Super Soul was when he went to France. And this Vishnu Rata tells me this story. Vishnu Rata was translating Prabhupada's books from from English into French. And at that time, he had gone to their printer, Bruno, who was in Italy. That's where the printer was, in Italy. So Vishnu Rata traveled with Bruno to France, where Prabhupada was, in New Mayapur. and with Bruno, because they wanted to work out the technicalities of the cover and the different font styles and the different things that needed to be finalized before they printed the Bhagavad Gita into French. So Bruno knew Italian and he knew French. So he came with Vishnu Rata and had a meeting with Prabhupada. And so Bruno would be asking questions of Prabhupada in French, and Vishnu Rata would translate, I think maybe along with Yogeshwar, I'm not sure who else was there. They would then translate the French into English for Prabhupada so they could, get these technical questions ironed out. So they would, be discussing this for maybe, I'm guessing here, but maybe half hour. They were going back and forth, and Prabhupada was thanking, Bruno very much for what a great job he is doing. Always, again, showing his appreciation. Then Bruno asked a philosophical question in French. Nothing about the books, but a philosophical question. And without it being translated for him by Vishnu Rata or Yogeshwar, Prabhupada answered Bruno in English, the perfect response to his question that he asked in French. And Vishnu Rata said to me when he told me the story, he said, who knew Prabhupada knew French? Now, whether he knew French or a super soul gave him the understanding of what he was asking, but he responded perfectly. And then they translated it back from the English into French for Bruno to understand. So Prabhupada is, he knew so many things that we don't understand. We have to appreciate his superiority and have faith that he is the guru. There was also where Vaikuntanath Prabhu was concerned about that they were giving out Prabhupada's books to so many people. But as he read in the books where Prabhupada is stressing that to go back home, back to Godhead, you need to be initiated. That if you're not in that parampara line, then you don't have the chance to go back to Godhead. So he was, had this query on his mind. And he asked, this was in India that he was with Prabhupada. And he asked, I'm trying to get to the exact story so I don't. He said, this is in Vrindavan, where Prabhupada was giving a series of lectures on the nectar of devotion in 1972. So this question was plaguing him, that, you need to be initiated, but if you're not in this parampara system, it's like a chain. And if you're not initiated, you're not linked up to this chain, then you can't go back to Godhead. So, he was thinking we're distributing so many books, but if the people who read them are not initiated, then they can't go back to Godhead. So one day he said, I was following Prabhupada from Rupa Goswami Samadhi, where Prabhupada was lecturing. And just before Prabhupada stepped onto his courtyard, Vaikuntanath said to Prabhupada, we're distributing so many of your books, but if people aren't initiated, then they can't go back to Godhead. Prabhupada turned to him, looked at him right in the eyes and said, just by reading my books, they are initiated. Vaikuntanath said that he thought that was the most incredible example of compassion they had ever heard. That's how potent these books are.
This is my favorite story. I mean, yes, it is beautiful.
So we thank Vaikuntanath for that. There's so many here. There's a nice story from Bhanubhata. Do you know who Bhanubhata is? Jagat Purush. They were brothers.
I know Jagat Purush very well. He established the temple in Leicester on the Auspice Street.
Good. I'll tell you his story after I tell you his brother's story.
Oh, Hare Krishna.
Okay. So we have enough time. We still have 25 minutes here.
Yes.
Okay. So Bhanabhata at one time was the temple commander in Mayapur. He had just become the temple commander there. And this was just prior to the devotees coming from America, from all around the world. They would come to Mayapur, and for Gaur Purnima. So he was there before most of the entourage, or not entourage, but most of the devotee congregation would come. And the grounds needed keeping up. They needed fixing up. The rooms hadn't been made yet. They hadn't been cleaned. There's so many things to do around the temple before the devotees would arrive. So being the temple commander, he was very much in distress. He was in anxiety about getting it all done. He wanted to be nice for the devotees. So every morning he would ask the devotees, "Oh, Prabhu, can you help? We need this and this and this done." So the devotees would help. But he asked one particular devotee, who was an African-American, big, strong fellow. And he said, "Oh, Prabhu, can you help with this and that?" And the devotee said, "No, I'm only here in Mayapur to chant Hare Krishna." And Bhanabhata was, "Hey, come on, you got to help out." He was like very frustrated. Every morning he would ask him, no, I'm just here to chant Hare Krishna. And he would go off into the forest or into the, amongst the palm trees there and chant Hare Krishna all day long. So he was getting, again, a little fried, a little upset, a little frustrated. Not a little, but he was really frustrated to the point where he wanted to go and broach this dilemma to Prabhupada, who was there in Mayapur. So because he was the temple commander, he had access, to Prabhupada. He could walk in and ask Prabhupada and tell him the situation, that this one devotee wouldn't do any service. So he went into Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada was, against, leaning up and with his leg up and his bead bag, he was chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And he said, "Excuse me, Srila Prabhupada, but I have this problem. I'm wondering if you could help me." Prabhupada said, "Yes." And then Bhanabhata said, "Well, this one devotee, we're getting the temple prepared, the grounds, and we have so much to do for the devotees to come. And there's very little time left. And this one devotee won't do any service. I ask him every day, would you please help and do some service? And all he wants to do is go out amongst the palm trees and chant Hare Krishna all day long. He won't do any service." Prabhupada was looking at Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I turned to him and said, "Oh, you think chanting Hare Krishna is not service? It is the greatest service." So Bhanabhata said he felt like an ant, kind of like Mula Prakriti. He felt 1 inch high. He said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, yes, I understand. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada." And he backed out, without saying another word. And Bhanabhata took that as probably the greatest lesson that he ever learned from Prabhupada. Prabhupada teaches many lessons depending on the person he speaks to. And that's a lesson that Bhanabhata needed to hear, that is the greatest service. So we should not be thinking that, oh, I've got to get my 16 rounds done and do this or that. But no, that is the greatest service. So we need to pay attention as we chant japa. Very, very important. So if we remember that story, that hopefully will inspire us to again, pay attention and not try to rush through them. Now, somebody's raising their hand. Rashmi, okay, go ahead.
Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. Am I interrupting you?
No, go ahead. Good to hear from you.
I was wondering if you know any story from, I believe that Srila Prabhupada took his disciples for the first time to Vrindavan in Kartik, to the Radha Damodar temple. Do you know anything from there? Any stories or anything, accounts?
Nothing has come to mind. There might be, but I'm not sure. Nothing is coming right at the moment. But it's a good question. I have more stories more people to interview, evidently. So no, I don't have one for that, but it's a good question for sure. But I was going to tell you a story that's very significant from Jagat Purush. Anupata's brother. Very, very nice, very great devotee, as they all are. But Jagat Purush told me that on one occasion, they all were returning from the morning walk. This is in Bombay. And Prabhupada quite often had a morning walk there on the beach with Dr. Patel, who would always be the devil's advocate and take the opposite side of what Prabhupada was teaching, but pose so many questions and ideas to Prabhupada that he was quite the, having the negative banter with Prabhupada. So on this one occasion, Dr. Patel was having an animated conversation with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was saying something critical on this morning walk about one of the well-known figures of recent history. And Prabhupada was quite critical. And Dr. Patel, as he had done many times, really objected strongly to Prabhupada's criticisms. He asked Prabhupada, why do you have to criticize? Let them be. You do your thing. Let them do their thing. Just leave them alone. Why do you have to criticize them? They are great souls in their own right. So let them just be. If you don't agree with their philosophy, just let them alone. This was his discussion, or not really discussion. He was telling off Prabhupada, Then Prabhupada stopped and said, if I am in an operating room conducting an operation with a patient, and someone comes into the room and starts cutting my patient, and I'm just going to stand there and watch it happen? No, I'm going to say, get out. And Prabhupada said it loudly. He said, get out, you rascal. He said, I cannot be silent. These rascals and fools have destroyed the culture of India, and therefore I must speak out, and I will speak out. Prabhupada was very strong. So what does this tell us? This is a lesson that we should be bold in preaching. The Sankirtan movement is for a reason. If there's a law here in America, I don't know how it is in the UK, that if you see, for example, a child crossing the street with traffic coming, it's your duty. You can actually be held liable not to go save that child. So that is our duty as human beings. That's humanity, to show humanity by helping people give the proper philosophy about how not to have anxieties, how to get out of this material cycle of birth and death. They don't know they're suffering. So we have to tell them by giving them Prabhupada's books. So that is the lesson that we have to realize. No, don't be like, oh yes, be humble and not create, an argument with somebody. But this is our duty as human beings. And Prabhupada is saying, no, remember this story about the operating room. Don't let somebody else perform that surgery. That is your duty. You're the doctor. We are the doctors by giving Prabhupada's books out. This is the example to understand.
Rivo. Ben, you had your hand up briefly. No?
Somebody else?
There is this beautiful story.
Okay, Rashmi.
Okay, Rashmi.
Sorry, that was accidentally.
Okay.
There's this beautiful story with Bhagavat Maharaj, and there's a few of him who wrote these books, dictating this book. I found that very impressive. You know which I mean? Krishna comes.
I'm not sure which one that is. Bhagavat, who's now a Maharaj sannyasi, Bhagavat?
Yes.
I'm not sure which
Krishna is dictating one. Every word. I read my own books.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah. It's also, Prabhupada tells that many times to different devotees. He did tell, Bhavananda, probably the only instance where Prabhupada revealed actually his true character, where he was in the room with Bhavananda, alone with Bhavananda. Bhavananda tells how Prabhupada very rarely, but this time he talked about how Prabhupada was with Krishna before he came to the material world. And he described how Krishna was telling him, Prabhupada, that you go down and you write those books. He said, don't worry, I will take care of everything. I'll provide for you. Don't worry, just go down and write those books. And Bhavananda said the room was like surcharged with spiritual energy, that what Prabhupada was saying was the actual fact. But Prabhupada would very rarely reveal that he was, in the spiritual world, and he was cognizant of being with Krishna. But that was the one time where Prabhupada described that. And so, yes, Krishna was writing those books. And that's why he says, oh, Prabhupada, why are you reading your books? He said, I didn't write these books. Krishna wrote these books. And then he also told Shruti Kirti, these books are so potent. He said, he called Shruti Kirti, he rang his bell. Shruti Kirti came in, he said, Prabhupada said to Shruti Kirti, after he paid his obeisance, says, this Bhagavad Gita, if you just read this one book, you can become Krishna conscious. Just this one book. That's all you need. A month later, rings the bell. Shruti Kirti comes in. If you read this Nectar Devotion, just this one book, you can become Krishna conscious. You don't need anything else. 6 months go by. Again, he rings the bell. Shruti Kirti comes in, pays his obeisances. So this Krishna book, he had the Krishna book on his desk. This Krishna book is so potent. This is the only book you have to. Actually, this one, if you just read this one chapter, you can become Krishna conscious.
Which chapter?
He pointed to a chapter. and then he said, but if you just read this one page, you can become Krishna conscious. Just this one page. He was impressing upon Shruti Kirti and all of us, now that we know the story, the potency of Krishna is there in his books. And then he said, actually, if you just read this one word, you can become Krishna conscious. Then he went back to read, put his head down there, which was the indication for Shruti Kirti to leave. So he got the message that yes, this is Krishna. That is the benefit of Sankirtan. You're giving them Krishna. Rashmi, was that an accident?
No, on the topic of Krishna book, I wanted to ask you a question. So I'm trying to read the Bhagavad Gita along with my father. Mm-hmm. He's in India. He lives in Bombay. He's 78, and we've started reading Bhagavad Gita. But in the month of Kartik, I told him, now we're going to stop, and from tomorrow you find your Krishna book. So my copy of Krishna book is still there. So I told him, you find the Krishna book, and then we will, you tell me one pastime and I'll tell you one pastime. And this entire month, that's what we're going to do.
Right.
Because he's very old, he's very frail, I'm always living in anxiety. I'm forever in this anxiety that will I finish the Bhagavad Gita? And once I finish the Bhagavad Gita, which book should I go to? Should I go to Ramayana? Should I go to Bhagavatam? Is too extensive, and my father is so frail that he will not be able to hold the huge volumes of Bhagavatam like Chaitanya Charitamrita. I tried to get copies of Chaitanya Charitamrita sent to him, but he absolutely refused. He said, I will never be able to hold such a heavy book. So,
A heavy book as
like,
which one?
I was trying to get him to read Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Okay, well, what about the Krishna book again? It's
Yeah,
a big
so
book.
Krishna
There's
book.
3 volumes.
Yeah, so Krishna, I was thinking of Krishna book with that in mind because he's read it once. But I told him that why don't we both discuss, like how we discuss Bhagavad Gita, like that.
Mhm.
Why don't we both discuss Krishna book? So do you think that's a fair, or do you think that's a reasonable thing to do?
Very reasonable. Absolutely. Krishna, anything, just touching the book will help your father. Just having it on the bookshelf will save him. Just by reading it, just one word. Yeah, just read, all these stories are there for our benefit. The reason that Prabhupada printed the Krishna book as soon as he did, because previously when he first came, he told the devotees not to jump over all of the other cantos. Prabhupada wanted us to read Canto 1, Canto 2, 3, 1 through 9 before we reach the 10th canto, which is essentially the Krishna book, Krishna stories. But why did he print it so quickly? Because he knew that he had a limited time, and he knew that most of his devotees were impersonalists. We come from an impersonal background. We had no idea, no conception that God is a person. So Prabhupada, for us Western devotees anyway, disciples, he wanted to instill with us the importance of understanding that Krishna is a person. He has qualities, he has form, he has pastimes, he has entourage, he has friends, he has a girlfriend, parents. Who knew? So Prabhupada wanted to encourage or to let us know as soon as possible to get us off that impersonalist platform. So if, just reading the Krishna book over and over again, you can't read it enough. So just let him memorize these stories. Talk about what's his favorite, demon. What's his favorite story of Krishna killing the demons? I performed a play for Prabhupada when he came to Denver one time, the story of Pondraka. And I'll never forget that story because I not only performed it, but I've heard it over and over, and I tell it over and over again, which is an interesting story how we had in Denver Temple, it's a very cavernous temple room, very tall ceiling. So any sound, it kind of reverberates. So Pondraka, the story where the person, the demon, he pretends to be Krishna. He's got the 4 arms of Narayan, and Krishna's there. And by this time, I played a demon. By the time that Krishna's about to kill Pondraka, Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasana watching the whole play go on, enjoying it. Prabhupada loved plays. He actually performed in plays himself as a young man. So during the play, we had it set up beforehand, because we performed many plays in Denver, that there would be pyrotechnics in the temple room. And we had one devotee in the audience that would set these off, that as soon as Krishna would kill Pondraka, this bomb, essentially a cherry bomb, would go off in the temple room and explode at the time that Pondraka was killed. So I was lying down playing dead, but I was focused on Prabhupada on the Vyasasana, watching his reaction. And the explosion went off. It was so loud in the temple room. You could not be affected by the sound of this bomb, essentially. And Prabhupada jumped back on the Vyasasana, sat back on the Vyasasana, startled, because no one knew it was coming except for those actors. And Prabhupada, after the initial shock, he smiled because he appreciated the theatrics that we had taken the time and effort to perform. So just an example of Prabhupada loved these Krishna stories. He said that these stories bring his books to life. So that is, there's so many examples of Prabhupada, reading the Krishna book in New Vrindavan on Janmashtami. And he would go on and on. He'd say, okay, next story, keep reading, next chapter. This is way after midnight for another hour or two. And the devotees were falling asleep. Prabhupada, next. He was so absorbed in the Krishna stories. So to be absorbed, to get your father absorbed in those stories, there's no loss or diminution. So by all means, do not be afraid to read it again.
Yes, thank you. Prabhuji, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So, this is a very selfish question. So I have been looking for a reason on some days when I'm extremely busy not to chant. And I vaguely remember that I read somewhere, maybe in some morning walk, or I don't know where I read it, that Prabhupada did say to one of his disciples that, okay, you don't chant. So I'm looking for that story, but so I can tell my mind it's okay, on some days you don't chant. So do you remember what that connection was? But he did tell the others that no, this is only applicable to this particular bhakta. It's not applicable to the rest of you. Do you remember anything like that?
Well, there is a story where, some devotees were criticizing this person or that person and thinking that, oh, he's not chanting. So, and then Prabhupada said, well, are you doing as much service as he is? So he would always defend his disciples, but not that he would give a blanket authorization to chant, but he was always defend the amount of service that someone was doing as justification for maybe not chanting his rounds that day. But, there's exceptions to every rule. But Prabhupada did say in Los Angeles during a morning class that if you chant your 16 rounds every day and follow the 4 regulative principles, I guarantee you will go back home, back to Godhead. I guarantee it. He said it 3 times. I guarantee it. And then to help you also in that regard, because, it's such a difficult thing, but Prabhupada was giving another class in LA, and he said, the class was stressing the importance of being Krishna conscious 100%, being 100% Krishna conscious, 100% Krishna conscious to go back to Godhead. And then Prabhupada looked out at the devotees in the audience, and he kind of saw that there was like, they were like some chagrin that they, oh my God, how am I going to be 10%? It's such a high bar to reach. And Prabhupada said, well, he looked around. If you're 90% Krishna conscious, Krishna will take you. Still, he saw some heads kind of like bowing. Oh, okay, 90. Well, that's better than 100%. And then Prabhupada said, well, if you're 80% Krishna conscious, Krishna will still take you. And there was some sighs of relief. Okay, 80%. Well, that's better than 90 or better than 100. That's such a high goal. And then Prabhupada, and this is told by Jayapataka Swami, he was in the classroom at that time. Eyewitness, okay? So then he said, Prabhupada was getting off the Vyasa-san, threw his chadar over his shoulder, and said, if you're 70% Krishna conscious, Krishna will still take you. Threw his chadar over and walked down. So that's the mercy of the pure devotee. That if you're even 70% Krishna conscious, Krishna will still take you. And I'll tell you one last story, because I know we're nearing the end of this 2 hours. And again, thank you, Gauranga Sundar, for allowing me to speak. You're very kind. This is a story told by Jai Gauranga Prabhu and confirmed by Nrisimha, who were in Mexico City with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was giving a class again to congregations, maybe a Sunday feast lecture again, and discussing how from the Gita, where Krishna says, if you think of me at the time of death, I guarantee you will come back to me. So they opened it up for questions afterwards, and a lady raised her hand and she said, she was not an initiated devotee, but she said, Prabhupada, well, you've been discussing how that if we think of Krishna at the time of death, we'll go back to the spiritual world. But what if I think of you at the time of death? Will that have the same effect? Prabhupada paused a moment, closed his eyes, and then he opened it and said, yes, that will have the same effect. Thank you very much. I told that to Shamashundar 3 days ago. He came and visited me. And he said he never heard that story. And Shamashundar said to me, the first thing he said was, oh, that's great to hear. That's a lot easier. So another reason for hearing these stories, it'll enable us, hopefully, to think of Prabhupada at the time. So that's how we have to focus our consciousness, either on Krishna or Prabhupada. So with
Beautiful.
that, I thank you very much.
Absolutely nectarian and beautiful. You could go on for hours, sir, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I
Hare
could,
Krishna.
but maybe another time.
I mean, I quite recently, read from Govinda Dasi.
Mhm.
Prabhupada was asked, Srila Prabhupada, who are you, really? And according to her, Prabhupada said, if I would tell you, you would faint. So, yes, we don't really know deeply, but in time we will know.
Exactly. The other point that this brings up is when Prabhupada was on his departure bed in Vrindavan, final days. And the devotees, were very affected by seeing Prabhupada in that withered, emaciated condition. Very hard to see him like that. And for devotees that had not seen him in a while, they come in for the first time and see him in that situation. They were like struck, affected, with great sadness and emotion. They would be crying. Prabhupada said, why are you crying? They're crying. Prabhupada, we're sad to see you in this situation. Prabhupada said, I'm an old man. Dying is natural for an old man. Don't be sad. This happens to everybody. Do not be sad. This is natural. If someone dies young, then that's something wrong. But it's natural for an old person to die. So don't worry. And then they said, but Prabhupada, we won't know how to communicate with you if you're not on the planet. We won't know how to communicate with you. And Prabhupada said, oh. He said, therefore I will come to you within your dreams, in the heart as Chaitya Guru. I will communicate with you in your dreams. And another devotee said, well, if you're not here, if you're not on the planet and we can't, something in the philosophy we don't understand and no one can actually explain it properly for me, what should I do? Prabhupada said, you chant and the answer will be revealed to you within the heart. So the ultimate answer is again, going back to japa, the holy names.
Beautiful.
No.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavata
Thank you.
pranams.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed that. Thank you, Prabhu.
You
Well,
enjoyed that all? Yes?
very much. Very much.
Hare Krishna.
Just
I
one thing,
certainly-
Prabhuji, you mentioned that Prabhupada had also done a lot of plays. Would you happen to have any clips or something you could show us maybe the next time you come back to see us?
Well,
That would be very
not really
interesting.
clips, but he did discuss how. I'll tell you one little story that I know from the memory series is that he did act in plays as a young man, and they performed plays so sincerely and with such enthusiasm that they would practice over and over again. They would practice many hours before the actual performance would be performed. And that at that time, only there were only men in the plays. The men would play the women parts. But the point that Prabhupada was making was that not only do these plays bring his books to life, but that the actors, who he guaranteed would go back to the spiritual world, he enjoyed their plays, their performances tremendously, that when he was acting in plays, they took it so seriously, they would practice like all the time. So he was encouraging the actors, the Vaikuntha players, to don't neglect it, practice so that the performances could be first class. That was the lesson to be learned there.
Hare Krishna.
Wow.
Anyone else? Amit, Ben.
Hare Krishna. No, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you for sharing all them stories. I felt that Sri Prabhupada was actually in the Zoom call itself. But thank you for sharing, and I really enjoyed listening.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Ben has his hand up.
You have to unmute, Ben, or is that just a pranams?
No, hand up is not pronouns. Unmute. Yes.
Oh, he had it.
No. Again, from the mobile, it's not that easy.
Right.
I cannot unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh. No.
We heard you then.
You muted again.
There you go.
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
My unmute button is not working for some reason. I keep tapping it, but it won't unmute. Okay, so my question is, in the story about Ham Saduta, so who is Ham Saduta?
Oh, you're asking me who is Hamza Duda?
Yeah.
He tells it in the books. You're going to have to get the series to find the answer.
Oh, right. Okay.
or get the book. If you send me your email, I'll send you the answer. My email is prabhupadamemories@gmail.com.
What about WhatsApp? I have your number.
Yeah, you can give out the WhatsApp number.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, there's so many more stories. I mean, I could go on, but you're probably getting tired. It's late there. So
you are still early in the day.
For me, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, nice. Hare Krishna. That was absolutely beautiful, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, we can have you.
Kripas into Babicha, Patitanam Pavanibhyo, Vaishnavibha, Namam Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani, Richarane Nirvishesha Shunivadi Vasudha Distarane. Srila
Prabhupada ki jai. Siddhanta Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
We book you in again sometime in the future.
Anytime, let me know.
Oh, Hare Krishna. Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. And on this note, I think we will stop here tonight. And we'll meet again next Saturday and carry on with our Srimad Bhagavatam. Did you all enjoy that? Prabhuji has left now. Beautiful, beautiful pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. And we will see you. Or do we want a bit of some Kirtan? Ben, what about? Can you just sing Nrisimha prayers? That's nice to finish with Nrisimha prayers for protection of everyone.
Yeah. I'll just have to do it unaccompanied by anything because
that's okay.
This time of night, my neighbor upstairs, he wouldn't really.
But anyway, Ben, I'm very happy, and I'm sure everybody is very happy to have you back.
Okay.
So, Hare Krishna. Go ahead. Nrisimha Pranam.
Namaste Narasimhaya Pralada Lada Dayani Hiranya Kasi Purvakshaha Sila Tanka Nakalaye Ito Nishimo Pareto Nishimo Nrisimha Madin Saranam Prapade Tabakara Kamalavari Nakam Adbhuta Sringam Dalita Hiranyakasipu Tanubringam Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hari Jaya Jagadisha Hari Jaya Jagadisha Hari Jaya Nishinadev Jaya Nishinadev Nrisimha Jaya Nrisimha Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Nitai Gora Haribo 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 Nitai Gora Haribo Jai Prabhupada Jai Nrisimha Bhagavad Ki Jai Jai Prahlad Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much, Ben. Here we stop and we'll meet again next Saturday, 7 o'clock, Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone.
Hare Krishna, everyone.